In this demonstration, I'll be using one of the delightful sentiment dies to create a layered effect. I'm using this particular die because of its unique raised embossing area, so unlike other metal cutting dies, this one also embosses as it goes through your regular die cutting machine. Also, I'll be using various different shades of cardstock, an A6 card, some gems, a couple of different colours of pigment ink, the turbo glue pen, tweezers, a stamp and some foam pads. I'm going to start out by stamping out the design. I've already mounted my stamp onto the block. I'm now going to use the purple pigment ink pad to ink up the stamp and make the impression onto the white cardstock. I have trimmed this cardstock down to be slightly smaller than the A6 card as well, and I will be going on to mount that onto a piece of coloured cardstock before I do any of the die cutting. I prefer the direct to stamp inking method, but of course, depending on which stamp you're using, you could also take the stamp to the ink pad. The benefit of using one of these style stamping blocks is that you can position it or take your time to position it before pushing it down, and you can make sure that you get good even pressure as well. There we go. Nice. As I mentioned, I will be matting and layering this onto some of the coloured cardstock, and I've chosen this to match some of the cardstock that I'm going to be die cutting with as well. I've now gone on to mat and layer that, and I've also applied some foam pads to the back of the stamped image, and I'm going to apply this directly to the front of the A6 card. I'm working landscape. Depending on your preferred design or preferred style, you could also work portrait. Now that's in position, I'm going to work on the main focal point, which is the love sentiment. And I'm going to die cut once from each of the different layers of cardstock. And I mentioned at the start that these are unique dies in the fact that they have the embossed area. However, to die cut them, you work in exactly the same way you would any other thin metal cutting die. So you will likely have a base plate and an adapter plate and then a cutting plate. So you would lay the die onto the adapter plate with the cutting edge face up, and then your cardstock facing down onto that. Place your cutting plate on top and then run it through your machine. Once you have, you'll have all of the different colours that you need. The next thing that I'm going to do is use the die cutting base as a platform. I'm then going to put a scrap piece of paper on it, and then I'm going to ink using two colours onto the die. And I'm using pigment ink on this occasion because a sticky ink like a pigment or an oil-based ink is better as it will stick to the metal of the die, whereas a water-based ink pad wouldn't. It would puddle and bead, so you wouldn't get a very attractive result. I've used the pink to shade across the top of the love sentiment, and now I'm using the purple to apply colour to the bottom area of that die. This is hopefully going to give me an ombre or a shaded effect when I die cut this through my die cutting machine. Once there's enough ink on, I'll slide that die off of the piece of paper, and this was the point of the piece of paper so that you didn't have to touch the die afterwards. And I'm going to take my piece of white cardstock, position it over the die and stick it in place, put the cutting plate on top and run this through the die cutting machine. When that's done, you can lift up the paper or card and then remove the die cut from the die. Because of the extra stickiness of the ink, the cardstock may not release straight away from the die as it usually does. However, just a little bit of teasing and it should pop out. There we go. And a lovely soft shaded ink effect there as well as a result of using those pigment ink pads. Trying to keep my work area clear. Not always easy when you're a crafter, as I'm sure you know. Next though, I'd like to layer up the die cut sentiments. And for this, I am going to use the Turbo glue pen. Obviously these die cuts are quite detailed, and therefore having the fine tip applicator of the Turbo glue pen makes it perfect for doing this technique. So I'm just running a thin line across all areas of that die cut. You only need to squeeze very, very gently on the glue pen to make it flow. That way you get ultimate control over where the glue goes and, more importantly, where it doesn't go. If you do get any glue blobs elsewhere on the project or on the cardstock, or it squidges out, let it dry and then try your creative detailer pen that's on the show. This is an eraser that will take away excess glue splodges. Okay, I've just fast forwarded a little bit to the point where I was putting on the final layer. I didn't think you'd want to sit and watch me do this forever. But hopefully you can see that this technique is really eye-catching when it's applied to sentiments like this. And the fact that I have done a stamped background gives the card an overall style, and then the colours I've chosen obviously help to get a sentiment across, but then after that there's very little embellishment, so I'm not using up too much of the craft stash, or indeed having to go and really source some more specific embellishments. Generally when I've stuck the layers on, I will put something on top, like a piece of paper, and then something heavy, and leave it for a few minutes just for the glue to set. Obviously through the magic of editing I've sped forward a little bit, but now we can see that's my sentiment done, and I've got my card ready somewhere. Here it is, and you can see how well that's going to work. What I'll do though is I'll apply some foam pads to the back of the sentiment. Again, I didn't think you'd want to watch me stick these on, so I sped that up a little bit. And just for a more permanent fix, I'm going to apply a little bit of the glue that's in the Turbo glue pen to each foam pad. Also gives me a little bit of wiggle time in case I don't quite get it in the right place. But that's just going to get plonked right in the centre on top of that stamped design. And I think that already looks fabulous. What about you? Something that you'd like to give a try? Just a little bit of extra now, I think, with the gems. So although these are self-adhesive gems, I do like to use the Turbo glue pen just to put on a tiny little dot where I'm going to put each of those gems, and then that gives some extra adhesive so that it will stay in place for a long time. Now, as I'm sure you're aware, little gems can be little blighters. So I did start out trying to show you how to do these, but I got into a bit of a wrestling match. So I have cut this little bit short. However, I hope you like the finished result and will treat yourselves to one of the delightful sentiments and give this technique a try. That's it for this video. If you have enjoyed your time with me today, please remember to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe for notifications of future videos. In the meantime, thank you again for watching, and I will see you hopefully next time.